You see, there's something going on in my life. It has to do with something spiritual. And I'm not a spiritual person. I don't believe that humans are spiritual beings. I believe that there's nothing to anything. I'm a nihilist. So, I think that to think that there's a reason for something to happen, which I do, I think that something happened to me and there's a reason for it. So, it's been really messing with me. I'm trying to figure out why something would happen to me, that I think there's a reason for it, and I've been like racking my brain trying to figure out how could there be no meaning and then something happened to me where I can't stop thinking there's a meaning, and it's been happening for months, and the more time that goes by, I think it more. So what I did was I finally looked at Sam Harris's book, Waking Up, and I got my answers that I was looking for. So then I thought, where did these things come from? And I realized that they came from nothing, because I was trying to figure out how I can be a nihilist and believe in a reason for something to happen. So what I want to do is read a small section of Lawrence Krauss's The Universe from Nothing in the preface, and that's going to explain why all the things that are in my life come from nothing. And this makes sense. Where we come from is not from a deity. It's from nothing. So this answers all the questions. This is halfway through the preface of the ebook, which is the hardcover preface. Our modern conception of the universe is so foreign to what even scientists generally believed a mere century ago that it is a tribute to the power of the scientific method and the creativity and persistence of humans who want to understand it. That is worth celebrating. As I describe in this book, the question and the possible answers to how something might come from nothing are even more interesting than merely the possibility of galaxies manifesting from empty space. Science provides a possible roadmap for the creation of space and time itself, and perhaps also an understanding of how the laws of physics that govern the dynamics of space and time can arise haphazardly. For many people, however, the fascinating possible resolutions of these age-old mysteries are not sufficient. The deep question of non-existence overwhelms them. Can we understand how absolute nothingness, without even the potential for anything at all to exist, does not still reign supreme? Can one ever say anything other than the fact that the nothing that became our something was a part of something else, in which the potential for our existence or any existence was always implicit? In this book, I take a rather flippant attitude toward this concern, because I don't think it adds anything to the productive discussion, which is what questions are actually answerable by probing the universe. I have discounted this philosophical issue, but not because I think those people who occupy themselves with certain aspects of it are not trying hard to define logical questions. Rather, I discount this aspect of philosophy here because I think it bypasses the really interesting and answerable physical questions associated with the origin and evolution of our universe. No doubt, some will view this as my own limitation, and maybe it is, but it is within that context that people should read this book. I don't make any claims to answer any questions that science cannot answer, and I have tried very carefully within the text to define what I mean by nothing and something. If those definitions differ from those you would like to adopt, so be it. Write your own book. But don't discount the remarkable human adventure that is modern science because it doesn't console you. Now, the good news. This past summer, physicists around the world, including me, were glued to computers at very odd hours to watch live as scientists at the Large Hadron Collider outside Geneva announced that they found one of the most important missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that is nature, the Higgs particle, or Higgs boson. Proposed almost 50 years ago to allow for consistency between theoretical predictions and experimental observations in elementary particle physics, the Higgs particle discovery caps one of the most remarkable intellectual adventures in human history, one that anyone interested in the progress of knowledge should at least be aware of, and makes even more remarkable the precarious accident that allowed our existence to form from nothing, the subject of this book. The discovery is further proof that the universe of our senses is just the tip of a vast, largely hidden cosmic iceberg that seemingly empty space can provide the seeds for our existence. The prediction of the Higgs particle accompanied a remarkable revolution that completely changed our understanding of particle physics in the latter part of the 20th century. Just 50 years ago, in spite of the great advances of physics in the previous half-century, we understood only one of the four fundamental forces of nature, electromagnetism, as a fully consistent quantum theory. In just one subsequent decade, however, not only had three of the four known forces surrendered to our investigations, but a new elegant unity of nature had been uncovered. It was found that all the known forces could be described using a single mathematical framework, and that two of the forces, electromagnetism and the weak force which covers the nuclear reactions that power the sun, were actually different manifestations of a single underlying force. How could two such different forces be related? After all, the photon, the particle that conveys electromagnetism, has no mass, while the particles that convey the weak force are very massive, almost 100 times as heavy as the particles that make up atomic nuclei, a fact that explains why the weak force is so weak. British physicist Peter Higgs and several others showed that if there exists an otherwise invisible background field, Higgs field, permeating all of space, then the particles that convey some force like electromagnetism can interact with this field and effectively encounter resistance to their motion and slow down, like a swimmer moving through molasses. As a result, these particles can behave as if they are heavy, as if they have mass. The physicist Steven Weinberg and somewhat later Abdus Salam applied this idea to a model of the weak and electromagnetic forces previously proposed by Sheldon L. Glashow, and everything fit together. This idea can be extended to the rest of particles in nature, including particles like those that make up the protons and neutrons, as well as fundamental particles like electrons, all of which combine to make up the atoms in our body. If some particle interacts more strongly with this background field, it ends up acting heavier. If it interacts more weakly, it acts lighter. If it interacts at all, like the photon, it remains massless. If anything sounds too good to be true, this is it. The miracle of mass, indeed, of our very existence, because if not for the Higgs, there would be no stars, no planets, and no people. Is apparently possible because of some otherwise hidden background field whose only effect seems to be to allow the world to look the way it does. But relying on invisible miracles is the stuff of religion, not science. To assertion whether this remarkable accident was real, physicists relied on another facet of the quantum world. Associated with every background field is a particle, and if you pick a point in space and hit it hard enough, you may whack out real particles. The trick is hitting it hard enough over a small enough volume, and that's the rub. After 50 years of trying, including a failed attempt in the United States to build an accelerator to test these ideas, no sign of the Higgs had appeared. In fact, I was betting against it. Since a career in theoretical physics has taught me that nature usually has a far richer imagination than we do. Until July. The apparent discovery of the Higgs boson may not result in a better toaster or faster car, but it provides a remarkable celebration of the human mind's capacity to uncover nature's secrets and of all the technology we have built to control them. Hidden in what seems like empty space, indeed like nothing, appear to be the very elements that allow for our existence. The discovery of a Higgs field further validates many of the ideas I discuss in this book. The idea that the very early universe went through a period of superluminal expansion called inflation that basically produced almost all the space and matter in the observable universe from almost nothing relies heavily on the possibility that another field, much like the Higgs field we seem to have discovered this past year, momentarily held sway in early times. The existence of a Higgs field permeating all of space today also begs several important questions, most notably, what conditions in the early universe led to such a cosmic accident? Why does the field have the value it is measured to have? Could it have been different? Could the laws of physics had initial conditions been slightly different have resulted in a universe without matter as we just observe it today? These are precisely the kind of questions I discuss near the end of this book. Whatever the ultimate resolution of these puzzles and others that I shall discuss in this book, our discoveries in fundamental physics and astronomy over the past 40 years have changed our understanding of our place in the universe in profound ways by changing not only the questions we ask, but the very meaning of the questions we have asked. That, as I want to stress once again, is perhaps the greatest legacy of modern science, a legacy it shares with the great music, great literature, and great art, and one that needs to be shared more widely. That's where it comes from. Now I'm reading Waking Up Spirituality Without Religion by Sam Harris, halfway through the preface. 20% of Americans describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. Although the claims seem to annoy believers and atheists equally, separating spirituality from religion is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It is to assert two important truths simultaneously. Our world is dangerously riven by religious doctrines that all educated people should condemn. And yet there is more to understanding the human condition than science and secular culture generally admit. One purpose of this book is to give both these convictions intellectual and empirical support. Before going any further, I should address the animosity that many readers feel toward the term spiritual. Whenever I use the word as in referring to meditation as a spiritual practice, I hear from fellow skeptics and atheists who think that I have committed a grievous error. The word spirit comes from the Latin spiritus, which is a translation of the Greek pneuma, meaning breathe. Around the 13th century, the term became entangled with beliefs about immaterial souls, supernatural beings, ghosts, and so forth. It acquired other meanings as well. We speak of the spirit of a thing as its most essential principle, or of certain volatile substances and liquors as spirits. Nevertheless, many non-believers now consider all things spiritual to be contaminated by medieval superstition. I do not share their semantic concerns. Yes, to walk the aisles of any spiritual bookstore is to confront the yearning and credulity of our species by the yard, but there is no other term apart from the even more problematic mystical or the more restrictive contemplative, with which to discuss the efforts people make through meditation, psychedelics, or other means to fully bring their minds to the present or to induce non-ordinary states of consciousness. And no other word links this spectrum of experience to our ethical lives. Throughout this book, I discuss certain classically spiritual phenomena, concepts, and practices in the context of our modern understanding of the human mind, and I cannot do this while restricting myself to the terminology of ordinary experience. So I will use spiritual, mystical, contemplative, and transcendent without further apology. However, I will be precise in describing the experiences and methods that merit these terms. For many years, I have been a vocal critic of religion, and I won't ride the same hobby horse here. For many years, I have been a vocal critic of religion, and I won't ride the same hobby horse here. I hope that I have been sufficiently energetic on this front that even my most skeptical readers will trust that my bullshit detector remains well calibrated as we advance over this new terrain. Perhaps the following assurance can suffice for the moment. Nothing in this book needs to be accepted on faith. Although my focus is on human subjectivity, I am, after all, talking about the nature of experience itself. All my assertions can be tested in the laboratory of your own life. In fact, my goal is to encourage you to do just that. Authors who attempt to build a bridge between science and spirituality tend to make one of two mistakes. Scientists generally start with an impoverished view of spiritual experience, assuming that it must be a grandiose way of describing ordinary states of mind, parental love, artistic inspiration, awe at the beauty of the night sky. In this vein, one finds Einstein's amazement at the intelligibility of nature's laws, described as though it were a kind of mystical insight. New Age thinkers usually enter the ditch on the other side of the road. They idealize altered states of consciousness and draw spacious connections between subjective experiences and the spookier theories at the frontiers of physics. Here we are told that the Buddha and other contemplatives anticipated modern cosmology or quantum mechanics, and that by transcending the sense of self, a person can realize his identity with the one mind that gave birth to the cosmos. In the end, we are left to choose between pseudo-spirituality and pseudo-science. Few scientists and philosophers have developed strong skills of introspection. In fact, most doubt that such abilities even exist. Conversely, many of the greatest contemplatives know nothing about science, but there is a connection between scientific fact and spiritual wisdom, and it is more direct than most people suppose. Although the insights we can have in meditation tell us nothing about the origins of the universe, they do confirm some well-established truths about the human mind. Our conventional sense of self is an illusion. Positive emotions such as compassion and patience are teachable skills, and the way we think directly influences our experience of the world. There is now a large literature of the psychological benefits of meditation. Different techniques produce long-lasting changes in attention, emotion, cognition, and pain perception, and these correlate with both structural and functional changes in the brain. This field of research is quickly growing, as in our understanding of self-awareness and related mental phenomena. Given recent advances in neuroimaging technology, we no longer face a practical impediment to investigating spiritual insights in the context of science. Spirituality must be distinguished from religion because people of every faith and of none have had the same sorts of spiritual experiences, while these states of mind are usually interpreted through the lens of one another through the lens of one or another religious doctrine, we know that this is a mistake. Nothing that a Christian, a Muslim, and a Hindu can experience, self-transcending love, ecstasy, bliss, inner light, constitutes evidence in support of their traditional beliefs. Because their beliefs are logically incompatible with one another, a deeper principle must be at work. That principle is the subject of this book. The feeling that we call I is an illusion. There is no discrete self or ego living like a minotaur in the labyrinth of the brain. And the feeling that there is the sense of being perched somewhere behind your eyes and looking out at a world that is separate from yourself, can be altered or entirely extinguished. Although such experiences of self-transcendence are generally thought about in religious terms, there is nothing in principle irrational about them. From both a scientific and a philosophical point. It's not funny. Not funny. Fuck you, it's not funny. From both a scientific and philosophical point of view. It's not fucking funny. From both a scientific and philosophical point of view, they represent a clear understanding of the way things are. Deepening that understanding and repeatedly cutting through the illusion of the self is what is meant by spirituality. Deepening that understanding and repeatedly cutting through the illusion of the self is what is meant by spirituality in the context of this book. Confusion and suffering may be our birthright, but wisdom and happiness are available. The landscape of human experience includes deeply transformative insights about the nature of one's own consciousness, and yet it is obvious that these psychological states must be understood in the context of neuroscience, psychology, and related fields. I am often asked, what will replace organized religion? The answer, I believe, is nothing and everything. Nothing need replace its ludicrous and divisive doctrines, such as the idea that Jesus will return to earth and hurl unbelievers into a lake of fire, or that death in defense of Islam is the highest good. These are terrifying and debasing fictions, but what about love, compassion, and moral goodness, and self-transcendence? But what about love, compassion, moral goodness, and self-transcendence? Many people still imagine that religion is the true repository of these virtues. To change this, we must talk about the full range of human experience in a way that is as free of dogma as the best science already is. This book is by turns a seeker's memoir, an introduction to the brain, a manual of contemplative instructions, and a philosophical unraveling of what most people consider to be the center of their inner lives, the feeling of self we call I. I have not set out to describe all the traditional approaches to spirituality and to weigh their strengths and weaknesses. Rather, my goal is to pluck the diamond from the dunghill of esoteric religion. There is a diamond there, and I have devoted a fair amount of my life to contemplating it. But getting it in hand requires that we remain true to the deepest principles of scientific skepticism and make no obeisance to traditions. Where I do discuss specific teachings such as those of Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta, it isn't my purpose to provide anything like a comprehensive account. Readers who are loyal to any one spiritual tradition or who specialize in the academic study of religion may view my approach as the quintessence of arrogance. I consider it, rather, a symptom of impatience. There is barely time enough in a book or in a life to get to the point. Just as a modern treatise on weaponry would omit the casting of spells and would very likely ignore the slingshot and the boomerang, I will focus on what I consider the most promising lines of spiritual inquiry. My hope is that my personal experience will help readers to see the nature of their own minds in a new light. A rational approach to spirituality seems to be what is missing from secularism and from the lives of most of the people I meet. The purpose of this book is to offer readers a clear view of the problem along with some tools to help them solve it for themselves. I share the concern expressed by many atheists that the terms spiritual and mystical are often used to make claims not merely about the quality of certain experiences but about reality at large. Far too often, these words are invoked in support of religious beliefs that are morally and intellectually grotesque. Consequently, many of my fellow atheists consider all talk of spirituality to be a sign of mental illness, conscious imposture, or self-deception. This is a problem because millions of people have had experiences for which spiritual and mystical seem the only terms available. Many of the beliefs people form on the basis of these experiences are false, but the fact that most atheists will view a statement like Rumi's above as a symptom of the man's derangement grants a kernel of truth to the rantings of even our least rational opponents. The human mind does in fact contain vast expanses that few of us ever discover, and there is something and there is something degraded and degrading about many of our habits of attention as we shop, gossip, argue, and ruminate our ways to the grave. Perhaps I should speak only for myself here. It seems to me that I spend much of my waking life in a neurotic trance. My experiences in meditation suggest, however, that an alternative exists. It is possible to stand free of the juggernaut of self, if only for moments at a time. Most cultures have produced men and women who have found that certain deliberate uses of attention, meditation, yoga, prayer, can transform their perceptions of the world. Their efforts generally begin with the realization that even in the best of circumstances, happiness is elusive.
Beliefs, really, you can't believe something or shouldn't be able to believe something merely based on its utility. Beliefs are not like clothing. You can't adopt them on the basis of comfort or utility. Well, it's thought that there are two quantities in this world. There are facts on the one hand, and there are values on the other. It's imagined that science can't tell us the answers to the most important questions. Of course, everyone agrees that science can help us get what we value. I mean, once we agree that we value something, then science is a very useful tool. But it can't tell us what we ought to value. And so it's thought from the point of view of science that when we look at the universe, we just see one event following another. We just see a concatenation of causes. And there's no corner of the universe that announces certain events as good or bad or right or wrong. We make those judgments. And therefore, from the point of view of science, when you look at a statement like it's wrong to cheat on your spouse, it seems like that statement doesn't really track reality in any deep sense. It's just conventionally wrong. It can't be really wrong from the point of view of science. This is just an improvisation we're doing on the back of biology. Now, I'm going to argue that this split between facts and values is an illusion. And my claim is that values are a certain kind of fact. They are facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. Now, I view this space of all possible experience as a kind of moral landscape where the peaks correspond to the heights of well-being and the valleys correspond to the lowest depths of suffering. And one thing that to drop out of this analogy is the possibility of there being multiple peaks. Maybe there are many different but morally equivalent ways for, in our case, human beings to thrive. But clearly there are many more ways not to thrive. There'll be many more ways to not be on a peak. And I think it's rather obvious that there are many more ways to suffer unnecessarily in this world than to be sublimely happy. There are many questions you could ask that are actually good questions. One would be, how would this work in practice? I mean, we often have values, genuine values, that can be in competition with one another. There can be trade-offs between values. How do we balance one person's well-being against the well-being of the group? So you take, for instance, this recent tragedy in Japan. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it certainly seems bad, but what if this causes us to handle nuclear materials so much more conscientiously than we ever would have in the future that it winds up saving millions of lives? It could be difficult or impossible to answer some of these questions. But in every area of science, in every area where we acknowledge that truth claims are valid, there are an infinite number of questions that are indeed difficult or impossible to answer. This does not nullify truth claims.